Cardinals of the Catholic Church gather in Rome to elect the next pope. Whether a moderniser or conservative wins, big challenges await them both within the church and on the global political stage. So what are they and what could be the future direction of the church? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Folly Bah Thibault. The elite of the Catholic Church gathers in Rome to choose a successor to Pope Francis, who died last month. His election 12 years ago was a radical change from the past, a modernizer winning out over more conservative forces to lead Christianity's largest church, a man who sided with the poor rather than the powerful. His daily calls to Gaza's only Catholic church, a symbol of his legacy for many people. Who will follow him will be chosen by an ancient and secretive electoral process, the Conclave of Cardinals, 133 of whom will vote. Prediction is pointless, but what can be forecast are the challenges the new pontiff will face in office. He'll lead a church divided over its future direction and where the balance of power, some say, is shifting towards the global south. He'll take office too at a time of worsening global conflict and division and more polarized political leadership. So how important is this election, not just for the church, but for the world? We'll talk to our panel shortly, but first this report from Alex Baird.
A church in mourning. The death of Pope Francis on April the 21st left the Catholic world without a leader. But after 9 days of remembrance, a new phase of an ancient tradition will begin. Cardinals from across the world are heading to Vatican City to elect a new pope. They will enter a sealed conclave on Wednesday where they will be totally cut off, with no access to any electronics or news from the outside world. They'll be kept under lock and key until they can make a decision with a 2/3 majority on who will lead the Church's 1.4 billion members. Each time the so-called princes of the Church vote, their anonymous ballots will be placed into a stove in the Sistine Chapel and burnt. When the smoke from that chimney turns from black to white, it means a decision has been made, and that decision will set the course for the world's biggest Christian church.
I think there's a number of issues that the Cardinals are looking at as they go into the conclave. First of all is the legacy of Pope Francis. Are we going to have a pope who gets up and says, Francis was a disaster, we need to go back to the old church? I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're going to find someone who supported Pope Francis, who is in touch with his legacy and wants to continue it, but we're not going to find anybody like Pope Francis. There's just nobody like him.
133 cardinals will be eligible to vote. They come from 5 continents and represent around 70 countries. The group is the largest and most diverse in the Church's 2,000-year history. There's no indication about how they will vote or what direction the Church could take. Conclaves can take days, weeks, or even months to choose a new pontiff. And until then, the world's eyes will be trained on this small chimney. Alex Baird, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Let's now bring in our guests for today's Inside Story. From Rome is Gerard O'Connell, Vatican Correspondent for America Magazine and author of The Election of Pope Francis, an inside account of the conclave that changed history. From Freetown, Sierra Leone is Michel Mondengele. He's the country director for Sierra Leone and Liberia for CAFOD, the Catholic Agency for Overseas Development. And from Chicago is Stan Chiuilo, research professor of world Catholicism at the DePaul University and president of the Pan-African Catholic Network. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on Inside Story. A warm welcome. Gerald, let me start with you in Rome. I understand that unlike in a normal election, none of the contenders in the Vatican is openly campaigning to be elected. So what is the secret ingredient here? How does one get noticed and chosen in this conclave?
Well, already for 7 days, the cardinals, all the cardinals, both the electors and the older cardinals, and more than 100 of them, there's cardinals over the age of 80, have been meeting in plenary sessions. And each of them has the possibility to stand up and speak his mind. Some of them have spoken quite strongly. Some criticized what Francis had been doing. Others have come out very forcefully in support of what he has done and said the next pope must continue on this line. So they've had this, let's say, plenary meetings, and then they've had a lot of private meetings over dinners, at discussions in language groups, in continental groups, and they have a lot of caucusing, if you wish, to try to work out. They've listened to what is the state of the world and what is the state of the church, and so they're trying to work out the identity kit of the one who should succeed Pope Francis.
Gerald, conclaves usually last either several weeks or in some cases days. Pope Francis was elected in, I think, 2 days or so. How long do you anticipate this one to last? Will it be a while before we see the white smoke? Are you anticipating some drama at this conclave?
Well, there are two factors. One is that many of the cardinals do not know each other, but that will not necessarily extend the conclave. Since 1939, that's almost 100 years, all the conclaves have ended between 1 and 3 days. Only 2 have lasted 3 days. The one that elected John the 23rd in 1958 and the one that elected John Paul II in 1978. I reckon that by next Friday, we will have a pope.
Okay. Michel Mondengele, let me come to you and ask you for your prediction. When do you think we'll have a pope? And what do you think is a secret ingredient? As someone who's looking from the outside, you're in Freetown, Sierra Leone, what do you think a cardinal needs to do to convince his peers that he can represent the church globally?
Thank you very much. I think for me, the most important thing the cardinals can do to convince their fellow cardinals is actually the interest in the poor, the interest in the life of the church and the population. And a pope who will be looking at, the situation that the world is facing now, like issues of climate change, issues of poverty, conflict. And I think that type of pope and inclusion as well, I think that type of pope is what we might need in the coming years for the church. And not only for the church, but also for the world.
And we will look at those issues more closely in a moment. Stan Chulo in Chicago, let me come to you. Every conclave is different, of course. What do you anticipate will be different about this conclave?
What is different really about this conclave is that we live in a different world. The world today is hurting, is a wounded world. There is a rise in all forms of extremism on both the right and the left. Our politics in the world today is a disorienting politics. Many people are suffering and are afraid about the future. I think that the Catholic Church faces the same challenge it faced in 1963, when John the 23rd, the reforming pope who initiated the Second Vatican Council, died. The question then was, should the cardinals continue the council and the reforming agenda of the council or choose a different path? Pope Francis convoked, for the first time in the history of the Catholic Church, a synod on synodality since 2022, and it produced an important document, the final document. I think that the question facing the church, the cardinals, is whether they would take that document to the implementation stage or abandon it and chart a different course.
Gerald, what are your thoughts about what Stan said there? This is a defining moment for the church, he says. And when you look at the issues, I mean, a lot of our viewers are familiar with the film Conclave, which is about the election of a new pope. And in that film, it portrays the church as having, conservatives and progressive branches which are vying for power for dominance in that church. Do you think that's an accurate portrayal of what's currently going on in the Catholic Church? Are we at a defining moment?
We're certainly at a defining moment because Pope Francis, as our friend in Sierra Leone said, he's opened up a real outlook for the church. He said the church must go out and look at the people, look at the poverty in the world, look at the suffering, look at the wars. And he said, we can't be looking at ourselves. We're not there to serve ourselves. We're there to serve the world. Mm-hmm. Certainly some cardinals who will go in to vote do not completely agree with his openness, with his inclusiveness, with his outreach, with his taking risks, like when he, for example, went on his knees and kissed the feet of the leaders of South Sudan to ask them, to beg them to make peace for their people and not be concerned with their own self-interest. Or when he went to the Central African Republic when they were still shooting the days before he came in. And the Catholic, the Christians and the Muslims were afraid to come out in the street, and yet he arrived and they all came out. So there are some who didn't like that risky style of papacy, this outreach, this simplicity, this he was a man with a great free spirit and he spoke freely. But there's, I believe, a substantial block of cardinals who do support what he's done and are determined to try to elect a man who will continue the processes he has started.
All right, Michel, Mondengele, your thoughts before we talk about the contenders, some of whom are African. Do you agree that what we're witnessing right now is a conflict between the modernizers and the conservatives? And when you look at the cohort of African cardinals in general, they're regarded as quite conservative, particularly when it comes to issues like the position of women in the church, same-sex marriage. Where do you think they're going to be leaning as far as the election of this new pope?
I think as far as, most Christians and people around here in Africa and Sierra Leone are concerned, I think what the interest of the people is a pope who will be, bringing everyone together and, trying to not to divide, not to be so conservative, but also to be inclusive. And as Pope Francis said one time, who am I to judge? And I think that's what the attitude of the people here, even though, the world has its own challenges and we are all diverse, but I think the idea is, for us to have a Pope who will be assembling us in our differences, but we can still live together. Christians, Muslims, or any other people, even those who do not have any creed. But I think that's a pope that, Africans are expecting, to have, rather than someone who's very extremist, yeah.
Stan, what are your thoughts about this? What do followers in the global south, in Africa, for example, what are they looking for in this new pope?
Yeah, I think Catholicism, since the Second Vatican Council, has faced the challenge of history. What's the kind of relationship the Catholic Church will have with the world? And that world is changing. And when you look at the demographics, Latin America, according to the latest statistics from the Vatican, has 47% of the Catholic population. Africa has 20% of Catholic population. And Africa has witnessed the fastest growing Catholic population between 2022 and 2023, close to 9 million new Catholics. So the world is also changing in terms of Pope Francis said is also a change of era. So the question, I think, is how the Catholic Church meets the challenges of the world, not with the same old answers, but the boldness to reimagine the future through a prophetic spirit. That is what Pope Francis captured. And sometimes people think it's not about Pope Francis or that is not about division. We have always had these contending tendencies.
Right.
Pope Paul VI, he had issue with when he published Humane Vitae. We have always had these contending tendencies. The question for the world and the church and all religion indeed is, how do you manage this tension in a healthy way so that especially the vulnerable, the weak, the victims of history are not constantly being re-victimized? And I think that's what Pope Francis, he saw tomorrow. And he met that challenge with the boldness of the gospel. And I think that my hope and the hope of the people I talk to in the global south, the ordinary women, everyday Catholics, is that they're looking for a church that accompanies them and bandages their wounds and gives them the capacity, the hope to actually live again.
Gerald, do you think the followers that Stan talks about will find that in Rome at the moment? How much influence do the regional blocs have, whether it's Europe, Africa, or Latin America? Is there perhaps a new direction that the church could take here with the power and the influence of these regions?
Well, for a start, we know that for the first time, Europe is in a minority in the conclave. So it doesn't have, it's had less votes than it's had in history. Mm-hmm. Secondly, as the speakers have said, the axis of the church has changed, and it's moved to the global south. We have in this conclave many representatives from the global south. Pope Francis deliberately went to the farthest, to the peripheries of the world to appoint cardinals because he wanted their opinions reflected. And so I think that the problems which Pope Francis saw are also the problems that are emerging at these plenary assemblies before they go into conclave.
But let me ask you, Gerald, is it correct to assume that the 108 cardinals that Pope Francis created will automatically vote for a reformist candidate?
No, it's not. It's not. It's not to be taken for granted. He's a point. That's 80% of the electors. Right. To be elected, you need 89 votes out of the 133 being cast. That's a fairly high bar. But we know that there is a substantial body of opinion which really welcomed what Francis had done as Pope and which want that legacy to continue. There is enormous trouble in the world. You have the wars in Sudan,
indeed,
in Gaza, the Middle East, in Ukraine, in Myanmar, in many other places too, there are conflicts. You have enormous poverty. You have the growing challenge presented by the economic situation in the world, by populism, and of course by artificial intelligence. And so the cardinals are looking for someone who can address these problems.
All right, Michel Mondengele, it's always been said that now it's time for Africa. It's time for Africa to have a pope. It hasn't happened yet. Do you think it will happen this time? And how will a pope from Africa shape the Catholic Church?
Well, I think from the people, CAFOD works with and the people we meet, common persons in communities where we work as an organization, the people are not really interested in whether the Pope is going to be an African one, but we are interested in a Pope. We just need a leader for the church, some leaders who will be coming to address the issues that, the people are facing, like, as I said earlier on, climate change, address issues of poverty, address issues of inclusion. And I think that's what people are yearning for, not necessarily an African Pope. And people will be happy with whichever Pope is going to be elected by the Cardinals.
Stan, do you agree with that? Does it matter where the Pope comes from? Michel seems to say it doesn't matter if he's African or not. What are your thoughts?
It matters if you are in the room. We must admit the asymmetrical power relation in the church. and in the world that Africa always comes last. It matters, for instance, that Africa, that has 20% of the Catholic population, has half of the number of cardinals. So Africa is no longer, as some people say, under the protection of the propaganda fide. Africa is really the heartbeat. If you want to look at the future of Catholicism in the world, you have to turn towards the Sahara. This is the point that must be emphasized. If you're not in the room, for instance, for all the good things that Pope Francis did, and I was privileged to have carried some projects for the Holy See, it still beggars my imagination that by the time he died, there was no African cardinal who was holding a senior position as a prefect. Cardinal Turkson is still holding an honorary position as a chancellor.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that is, Stan? What are the reasons for that?
If only I knew. But I think we have also to acknowledge the impact of racism and white supremacy in our church and in the world. So the fact that we're asking this question is actually the problem, because we are not asking, why won't, do you think a European would be? Because it's taken that is their birthright. So whereas as a good Catholic, I agree that, a good Pope is not necessarily an African Pope or a European Pope, but that the cardinals should put that in their dashboard, that Africa has suffered a lot because of so many factors, too numerous to mention here. So having an African Pope will actually be a validation, just like Pope Paul VI said to Africans when he went to Uganda. He said, you can now have an African church. I think that they will bring to the table a dynamism of faith. They will find new answers to some of the questions that has held the Catholic Church in this log jam, because Africa is always a depolarizing space where there is a search for consensus. The Western mind always sees things in binaries, conservative and progressive. This was in my language. I can translate it. It's goodness, beauty, love, caring for one another is neither right or left. It is just what it is. That
is very interesting what you say there. Just looking now to the future, Gerald, if I can come to you in Rome, we're in a world right now where there's, some would argue an absence of political leadership, a time of political and moral vacuum even, and many asking whether the Church, the Catholic Church, is one of the few organizations left that can provide that leadership today. Do you think the Church can put the world back on the right track?
The Church can challenge the power structures in the world. It does not have an army, it does not have financial influence, but it has 1.4 billion members. So it is a force in the world, and the world leaders recognize this. We've had the representatives of 162 nations at the Pope's funeral, at Pope Francis's funeral. And I'd just like to make a comment on what Father Stan had said, that under Pope Francis, at one stage, there were two of the department ministers in the Vatican from Africa, Cardinal Turkson and Cardinal Sarah. The Pope's inner circle, he had, first of all, Cardinal Monswengo from the Democratic Republic of the Congo as a very close advisor. And now he had, before he died, he had Cardinal the Cardinal Archbishop of Kinshasa again as one of his advisors.
Sure.
But there is a lot. The Church is a powerful influence. The Pope has a moral authority in the world which no political leader has. And certainly this was true under Francis, it was true under John Paul II, it was true.
Let me ask Michel about that. Can the Catholic Church, Michel, still be a moral compass for the world today, in the world that we live in today?
Yes, I think, yes, the Church has a moral responsibility, and the Church has always played this role. We've seen in many of our countries, like during conflict and other situations, the church has always spoken loud in favor of the poor, in favor of peace. So, and political leaders usually listen to the church, and the church is a powerful institution in most of
But there's so
African
many issues that the
countries.
church hasn't dealt with properly, including the abuse scandals, the financial scandals, Michel.
Yes, but I think of later years, we've seen with Pope Francis an attempt, to address some of those issues like abuse and so forth. And definitely, this is not enough. And the coming Pope has to pursue this agenda to ensure that these issues of abuse in the church are well addressed.
All right. Let me come to you finally, Stan, and ask you for your final thoughts. In a time when political leadership often seems transactional, with someone like Donald Trump in power in the U.S., how can the church speak truth to power without being politicized?
New forms of Christian nationalism have emerged, and Christians aligning with brutal regimes in the name of that they are promoting Christian agenda. This is what happened here in the United States and still continues to happen. That people, I worked for the Holy See, spent time in the borders, in El Paso, in Ciudad Juarez. I have met with so many Catholics who are hurting. And then you find that Catholics will support such terrible immigration policy, economic protectionism. Look at the terrible situation in Gaza. And thank God bless Pope Francis for donating his Pope Mobile, to help people in Gaza, giving his money. Even a few days before he died, he was calling Holy Trinity Parish in Gaza. That is the kind of leaders we are looking for. That the Catholic Church should model, and not just the Catholic Church, but all religion. Religion should be a force for good. So we need the church, the next Pope, to be inclusive of all of us and become a mirror that the world can see how the world can look like when we include everyone, especially the poor, the marginalized, women, people who have been misunderstood and rejected in the world.
Thank you so much.
This is what life should be, a world meant for everyone. And I think that that's why Pope Francis was not a friend of any of these people. And, I would say that people who come to see the Pope, especially some of these bad leaders, they should leave the Pope not smiling. The next Pope should make them cry.
Thank you so much. We're going to leave it there. Thank you, gentlemen, for a fascinating discussion. It'll be, of course, very interesting to see which direction the Catholic Church, I should say, takes in the next few weeks. Thank you, Gerald O'Connell, Michel Mondengele, Stan Chuilo. Thank you for joining us on Inside Story. And thank you, too, for watching. You can always watch this program again anytime by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And, of course, you can join the conversation on X. Our handle is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Folly Bah Thibault, and the whole team in Doha, thanks for watching. Bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.